the essence, I think, are uh, focusing on three essentials. And I feel they are relevant even today as far as leadership is concerned. But before I get to that, what is the scene today? Any discussion on leadership talks of the VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And this is supported by the host of things that are happening around us. We had the global pandemic, we have the wars happening, even closer on our borders, political upheavals, the markets are crashing, moving up and down, and all this adds to a very ambiguous kind of a world. Will you call that scary? I would prefer to call it challenging. I think challenging situations are not new. They change with time and technology. Yes, with technology, we are covering larger fronts, there are smaller teams working, but challenges by itself is not new. And we'll be talking of leadership in challenging situations, which, if I dare say, covers even what is happening today. Here we're talking of leadership and not the leader. Leadership is getting things done with a motivated team. We're talking of the process. It requires people to be grounded and aim at achieving positive, synergized action. And for this, the three essentials that I would like to mention are effective communication. This is after you have talked through what you have to communicate. Promoting initiative, and the third is grit in execution. Now, these are not traits. We are talking of a process of getting things done. And it's not as if traits are not important. Traits are involved in all this at various times. But we are not specifically talking of a leader or traits now. We are discussing a process where I say there are three essentials. In discussing this, I'll relate it to some of the challenging situations I have personally faced, two of them in fact, so that the context remains and it tells you why I have been, why these ideas have shaped up in my mind. And I'll start with the first one. This was when I was a company commander, 1990, in support of the Siachen Brigade in Siachen. Now, while I'm talking of all this, you'll see a star next to promoting initiative. This is going to be the main focus of what I say, because I feel it's very important today and it's something which hasn't received the attention it deserves. So now taking you to the Siachen Glacier. Now, operations in sub-zero temperatures is not new. There have been many in history. But when you combine it with high altitude, it's a totally different ball game. Acclimatization is involved. There are various stages of acclimatization. It becomes even more difficult. And there were posts as high as 21,000 feet. Now add to this a glacier, a moving mass of ice and debris. And then it becomes a totally different battlefield, and that's why they call it the most challenging battlefield in the world. Now, on this glacier, you have snow levels changing through the year. You have crevasses forming overnight, and all this adds to the challenge. And this makes all kinds of operations difficult on the glacier, including engineer support, which was to help people live and move on the glacier. One of the biggest challenges was crevasse crossing. So crevasses would appear overnight on routes that you normally use. And these could be as much as 10 meters. Here you see a ladder put across a crevasse, maybe 3 meters wide, and an individual is crossing. On the left you see a improvised bridge with slotted angles. They used to call it Texines then. So two of the angles have been welded to make it into a channel, and with this you could cross about 5 meters. But we wanted to cross about 10 meters, and not single individuals crossing, but snow scooters crossing, which means about 5 to 6 times the load. So we're talking of a capability which is almost 10 times more. And then we put our heads together to see what we can do. The same slotted angles, we pulled it apart 1 foot, braced it, made it a frame, put it back to back, used it as a truss, and between the trusses we made small frames to make it into a rigid module of 8 feet long. And on that we put skid boards. What are skid boards? These are boards with which you paradrope stores on the glacier, and then they remain in plenty on the glacier. So it was one of the few resources that you would find on the glacier. So this, with skid boards, made a module 8 feet long, and the moment we joined 5 of them, it became 40 feet long and it looked quite rigid. So we had to test it. So we made 6 thambis stand on it and bounce to make it a live load, and it stood. But then a more reliable test was when we launched it for a mule crossing at a place called Biarsok, which goes to the southern glacier. This was the route that 11 guards used to use those days, and you can see the mules are going. It was looking sturdy, it was looking very well, and there was a board there saying Biarsok Bridge, 11 guards. Now this is something which my field company protested, 9 field company of 5 engineer regiment. General Pawar is here. It's a story I'm sure he likes to hear over and over again. So the field company was a little upset that 11 guards' name was there. My simple question to them was, do you want to be maintaining the bridge? They said, no, sir. I said, then let 11 guards be there. Then on the side, I told them, there is no limit to what you can achieve if you don't mind if somebody else takes the credit. That, of course, must have gone over their head. But like good soldiers, they kept quiet, and we never put our name anywhere on anything we did on the glacier. Now, that was just an aside, but here was a bridge which looked good, but it had not been used on the glacier. And that opportunity came quite suddenly and quickly. Now, there was this post in the northern glacier, well beyond base camp, in a place called Chaman, which was covered with clouds for 27 days, and they could not evacuate a casualty because of the clouds. The helicopters couldn't go. The snow scooter couldn't carry him because there was a crevice which was 10 meters wide. So we decided to use this bridge. Fortunately, we had, I won't say fortunately, by design, we had an NCO in most of these areas, and the NCO closest to there, we said he should help us make it. The bridge was para-dropped. Instructions were written to the NCO in the language he understands. I asked the JCO to write it. He made a few sketches, and that went to him by Hector. And then he got together as many soldiers as he could around him. And 2 days later, we came to know the bridge was launched. And one more person was rescued, and operations continued on the glacier as usual. So you can see that in this little action, if you talk of grit in execution, there was plenty of it. If you talk of initiative at various levels, I think it was there. If it was not there, this wouldn't have happened. And then, when it comes to effective communication, it took place right from the time we thought of ideas, we formulated it, we kept it ready. And the last part, when we sent instructions to the individual who was on the glacier, which I thought was the most challenging part of it. Let's look at all these three one by one now. The first is effective communication. Now, effective communication helps accomplish a task efficiently, and it helps keep the team motivated. Motivating the team is also the job of the leader. Now, this requires, or I should say, this starts with thinking things through. Unless you have not thought through what you have to say, your communication is never going to be effective. Whether you call it planning, whether you call it understanding the ground, whether you call it getting the basic knowledge of what you have to do, you have to get all this and think it through. Thereafter, you have to have a very clear purpose, the why. Why are you doing it? And then, what and how must also be clear. Now, this should be backed by sincerity. And then you'll find whatever you communicate becomes that much more motivating. So, all this needs the basic cognitive skills. You need to be able to have an agile mind, have a clear head, social skills, all this comes into it. But the most important is the ability to listen. Because effective communication is not just giving instructions. It is giving instructions, getting the feedback, keeping the team motivated, modifying plans. The whole gambit requires effective communication. And so, listening is an important part of it. A leader should develop his own style of effective communication. Now, does that sound very complicated? To those who are in the audience in the army, I'll take them back to the time when in the IMA they were taught how to give verbal orders. Now, this was a very simple format where you went through a format and gave orders, and you covered almost everything that had to be done to get the team at ease, to give the orders, and keep them motivated. I made a slide thinking there may be a few who are not in the army, but here I find there are many. So I'm happy I made this slide. Just imagine a setting. It shows Pangangso Lake, but let me assure you, it is nothing related to the actual thing. Let us say here a platoon has to capture a post, blacktop, and the platoon Havaldar decides, or the platoon officer decides to give orders to his platoon before the task. Now, what is the format he follows? All those who have heard this at the IMA will recollect. It is a very simple format. It starts with getting the people at ease, giving them landmarks, then giving them a mission, going on to the method, which is called tariqa, administration, and then the coordination. And finally, the success signal when the job is supposed to finish. Over the years, I find that this has become a very basic format on which I give instructions. Today, after retirement, if I call my driver, I probably follow the same sequence. The first thing I tell him is, "Sab theek hai?" And after that, I tell him, "Do you know so-and-so area?" I'm talking of landmarks. Then I give him the mission. You have to go to so-and-so place and give these flowers by so-and-so time. And then if there are any complicated instructions that my wife has passed on to me, I pass it on to him. I said, make sure the flowers are not damaged. Remove the cover only when you reach there. When you give it to her, don't give the cover, just give the flowers. And then I come to the administration. It's going to take 3 hours to go there. Make sure you take your lunch and go. And then comes the bandobast. I give him the timings. I give him the address. I give him the telephone number. And then I insist on a success signal. I said, "Jab ho jata hai, call me back." Now, this may seem very trivial, but till he calls me back, I can't ring up and wish happy birthday. I can't give a completion report to my wife. So, the actual thing is all connected. Now, this format I may have oversimplified it, but very frankly, not only did I use it as a platoon commander to give orders and instructions the way I was told, but as life went on, one kept modifying it to other forms. If there were directions to be given at higher levels, it is just a modification of all this. You have to adapt it to it, you have to adapt it to the place, not rigidly stick to the format, but make sure that all these things are done. And each one of us, as we have grown up in service, we have adapted it to our own style. But it's all from a very simple thought process that has been with us right from the day we started learning how to lead units. As I said, effective communication is not just giving instructions. It goes on to communication after initiating the task. Feedback is needed during execution. It helps iron out all issues. It helps you give instructions thereafter. And during execution, you have to keep in touch to be able to communicate. You have to be familiar with what is going on. And during this phase, listening becomes a very important part of effective communication. I'll stop this discussion here on effective communication. All I'll say is it ensures a strong bond between the leader and the team and the task in hand. And from this flows promoting motivation and grit. So let's get on to the next. Promoting motivation. Do we need initiative only in leaders, or do we need it in the people around us, the people in the team too? If you need it in the team too, in the army, if you wanted to promote initiative, what is the Hindi word that you'd use? It doesn't come too quickly, which means it's an area where we didn't really focus too much. It is not that we didn't value initiative. We value it. We pick people with initiative. But do we consciously promote it amongst them? Promoting initiative is a different ballgame altogether. I must tell you a little story of my nephew in Delhi. She was passing through. She is a favorite nephew, and I wanted her to come home for a visit. And I rang up. She said, "We are at the hotel. We have 2 hours. If you pick me up, I'll come home and I'll get back." I said, "Good, I'll pick you up." And then when I picked her up, she said, "My son is also here. I'm with a friend. The friend's daughter is also here. We've kept both the kids in the room. She's gone shopping. I'm coming with you. I must be back in 2 hours." I said, "Assured." And then as we started, there was a call. It was her son. And the boy kept talking very fast. He was a little upset. She listened to him. And then she said, "I don't want to hear the problem. I want a solution." So the boy said, "Tell her not to trouble me." She said, "Give him the phone." She picked up the phone and then gave instructions to the girl. Cut the call, and embarrassed, she turned to me and I was staring at her. She said, "Why are you staring at me?" I said, "Do you realize you've just given me a lesson on how to promote initiative?" She was teaching the kid how to find solutions and not be stuck at problems. With small teams all around, we don't want to hear problems, we want solutions. How many times have you told a guy, "Thoda dimag laga, find out how to do"? When he rings up and says, "What do I do?" Because you know he's on the ground and he's to do it. But if he lacks initiative, your team is that much weaker. So yes, it's a no-brainer. We need to promote initiative amongst all. But then we need to have a simple definition which covers the soldier in the field and the general. And this is what I have chosen. Initiative is the ability to start purposeful action on one's own. If it is something small, it requires more presence of mind and a little resourcefulness. The moment it becomes a little bigger, you need to plan a little more and you need to do a little more. And when it comes to strategic thinking, it is something much more. But today, strategic initiatives are what you see in the papers as something great. So, initiative is required at every level. And it involves anticipating and thinking ahead, functioning with minimum instructions. It allows for flexibility in execution, and it helps in exploiting opportunities. So now, how do we promote it? We have to promote it in the leader, we have to promote it in the team. First, let's look at how we promote it in the leader. Now, initiative influences other quality traits too. When I was in the selection center, we used to select people and assess them on 15 quality traits. We found when we analyzed it in a study that none of these are independent of each other. Every quality trait needs either it supports something else or it is influenced by something else. In the case of initiative, it depends heavily on self-confidence and courage. It also in turn influences qualities like reasoning ability, organizing ability, social responsibility, and many others. A leader with initiative will have a happy mix of all these. Some of it will be strengths, something otherwise. But what is most important is self-confidence, and what is most trainable is self-confidence. So how do you ensure more self-confidence? The first step is selection. When it comes to officers, we select them based on a lot of qualities, but self-confidence is also something that you're looking for. But it's not just the officer selection we're talking of. In any job, when you select a person, you have to select a person correctly to have confidence in that particular job, which is a mix of his inner traits and his knowledge of the subject. Now, self-confidence doesn't stop at selection. Many times people have rung up and asked me, this guy did this. Did he show it when you're selected? A lot happens after selection. People who are selected and high in the merit during training in the academies, the order of merit changes altogether. Some have trained better, some have not trained as well. So training also helps shape a person. And after training, a person goes to the unit, and again you see a change. Grooming takes place. While training prepares you for jobs which are known, the grooming helps you address much more than what you've been trained for. You get exposed to new situations. Many times you have to take actions which you have not anticipated. And here, if you're groomed well in a unit, you find you gain that much more confidence. So self-confidence is a process that happens through your career. And one thing which is not talked of very much earlier, but talked of today, is enhancing inner strength. Earlier we just talked of it as resilience and stress, discipline and willpower. But today you recognize it as much more. We talk of looking inwards, we talk of self-awareness, we talk of emotional stability. All this is required in a leader. And when we talk of this, we are also talking of meditation, we are talking of pranayama. Now, all this is a very personal journey which a leader can take. I will not dwell on it a little more anymore, because this is widely written about now, but I can't but stress on this. Here I would like to talk of the spirit of adventure. Now, adventure is to do something new with an element of risk. It can be something like just cycling, it can be hang gliding, it can be mountaineering, it can be high adventure. But at every level, it is adventure for someone depending on what his level is. It is doing something new, it involves an element of risk in it, and it teaches you to do something different which involves risk. Now, how much ever you train for in war, what you finally see there, or how much ever you train for in college, since there are so many college students, what you finally see on the ground is going to be totally different. And to tackle that, you have to have the confidence that if something new comes, I can handle it. And adventure is a good format in which you tackle things that you haven't been trained for, and it helps build up confidence. I've said underneath the spirit of adventure must be nurtured. I haven't said it must be imbibed, it must be created. I say it must be nurtured because I'm convinced that this is a spirit that is there in everybody the day they were born. Let me show you a simple clip. Just 2 minutes. Bear with me. Now, when you do something new, it is adventure, and here is somebody doing something new, doing something for the first time. If the sound had worked, you would have found the child was really laughing. But I think you could see from the expression that the child was ecstatic about taking the first step. So, adventure is when you do something new with an element of risk. The spirit is in every child, it helps it grow, take its first step. It is what made people climb Mount Everest, take the first step on the moon. We must nurture the spirit and keep it alive. If it dies, we will be without change, without growth, and very soon without everything. And this spirit of adventure is something that also promotes initiative. It helps you face the unexpected, as I said. It helps you work outside your comfort zone. It helps you explore and grow. So here I'll close this discussion on initiative, on understanding initiative for an individual by saying the first step is to understand initiative, enhance self-confidence, and nurture the spirit of adventure. Now let us look at initiative in a team. Now, initiative is a combination of the person, the situation, and the environment. The person must first understand what initiative is. The situation will also dictate how much initiative he takes. The more familiar he is, the more he's trained, the more he's properly selected, the situation will dictate how much initiative he takes. But the environment, whether it is supportive, whether it holds you down, decides how much of an initiative you take. And creating this environment is the job of the leader. And for this, I have a few points. Delegation and responsibility. Now, delegation is something we talk of. Delegation does not mean palming it off to somebody else. Even after you delegate something to a team, the responsibility is still yours. You have to make sure that you've selected the right person. You have to make sure that he has been empowered to do it, briefed properly to do it, and thereafter you have to monitor to see if it is going well. But delegation makes sure that others also feel important. It helps build a feeling of trust within the group or within the team, which is one of the most important things to keep the team motivated. When you delegate, there are chances of mistakes, but then you have to decide whether it was by intent or whether it was because of other reasons, and nurture it correctly. This, I think, has been told repeatedly many times, but if there is delegation, there will be more initiative in the team, and it is linked. The next is essential versus detailed instructions. Now, some people give such detailed instructions that the person who's listening would just follow the instructions and there'll be nothing he'll do on his own. We grew up with a famous saying which we attribute to General Patton. He said, tell a person what to do and not how to do it, and you'll be surprised by his ingenuity. So if you want ingenuity to flourish, if you want initiative to flourish, you have to give essential instructions. So from detailed instructions, you have to move to essential instructions. Essential is what you need to focus on, and the rest is what the other guy has to focus on. And within this, there will be the elbow room to do what you want. And related to this is this zero error syndrome. As long as you're not stuck with the zero error syndrome, you'll find there'll be more initiative in the group. And it is for you to create this environment at each stage. Now, what is essential instructions and what is detailed instructions is a matter of judgment. And this is where you have to slowly develop a process where your essentials, your instructions, slowly build up till the time that guy says, I can do it. And then you leave it there so that he does the rest by thinking himself. Recognition, I need not say more on this. The day you recognize initiative, you'll find there'll be more initiative. We do give medals, we do give awards to people who function well through the year. But here we are talking of those small acts of initiative that people take. There may be a piece of paper lying here and 10 people will pass. One guy will pick it up and put it in the dustbin. In that situation, he's taken an initiative. And if somebody appreciates it, you'll find more people doing it. So this recognition has to become a part of the process of the leader of within the team, and it promotes initiative. The last is training for initiative. Can we train for initiative? I dare say we can, and we've tried it as an experiment in our regiment. In the two regiments I have, 4 tenures I did in 5 engineers and 2 engineers that I commanded. We did do this. We decided to promote initiative in the NAICs. So how did we go about it? The first is to make them understand initiative. So we got them together and we had small discussions. Gave them small problems and said, let us see how you'll approach it. We started with something very basic. You are the duty NCO. You have to take a patient to the hospital. You got a 1 ton. It went to so-and-so place and it broke down. What will you do? His first reaction may be, SM Saab ko phone karega. I'll ring up. So then you tell him, if the SM Saab asks you what has happened to the vehicle, what will you tell him? Say, driver se pooch ke bataya. And then you say, while you're ringing up, another vehicle comes and you find your vehicle is right in the middle of the road. You say, dhakka maar ke side mein karega. And then you say, while you're speaking to him, the patient says, nazdeek hai, main chal ke chale jaunga. So he suddenly realized that he had been talking to the SM even before checking out very basic things around him. Now you raise the situation. And as you raise the situation, everybody gets a little more active on, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And a stage will come when you'll have to say, no, that is beyond your purview, don't do that. Now here a person realizes suddenly there is so much more that he can do. Now this, we had made an interesting part of our Encarta, and it's not new. We carry out discussions on what we'll do in operations. And everywhere, if you promote initiative, it will imbibe initiative. But in these discussions, if you stick to a stereotype, you'll find you'll promote a stereotype. So this was the first step. And after that, we decided that each one of these cadres, there used to be 15, 20, 30 people, will go on some adventure trip after that. One of them we did was going up the Ganges from a place called Kachla to a place called Kankhal. Kachla is closest to Bareilly. Kankhal is in Rishikesh. By the time they went up, they found that the boat doesn't go the way they had imagined. Sometimes they were carrying it, sometimes they were dragging it because there was no water, and sometimes there were wasps stinging them. Things they never imagined happened, and by the time they went back, they were full of confidence. There's another, we sent them on a trek to the Valley of Flowers. So all these things have helped. And when I came back to the unit 10 years later, they were all Haldars. And at that time, the way they behaved, the way they reacted, the way they used to speak was totally different. General Pawar was commanding then, and he and our unit got the first Chief of Army Staff Commendation card. It's nice to say thanks to him. I would also say thanks to all these NCOs who were acting in all the places, because at that time we were in Siachen and we had moved the whole unit from one place to the other with all the stores and done something commendable, and it was these NCOs who had helped. I'll cut it here saying training for initiative is also possible provided you're clear as to what you're training them for and you're clear that you need it in them. Just one last slide on initiative and cultivated mindsets. What comes in the way of initiative often are cultivated mindsets that have continued in the army for a very long time. One is going to details. How often have we recognized as seniors saying, yeah, he really goes into details? Now, where does going into details end? And where does initiative at the lower level start? If you go into details, the people below you are going to stop thinking altogether. This has to change into go into essentials. You have to check the bare minimum and make sure that the others check what they need to check. And when mistakes happen, you should be very clear as to what you have to check and what the others have to check. One thing that you may also need to check is whether the trust you imposed on the other guy is really working. So a few additional checks here and there. But then what you check has to be, it cannot be as detailed as it has to be. And this is a shift that is definitely required. The comprehensive presenter. How often have you seen a person run through 100 slides and at the end of it you're totally confused as to where he started and where he finished? Now he wants to discuss all the options, he wants to discuss everything with you. Now this is also a follow-up of going into details rather than going into essentials. Even your presentations have to focus on essentials. SOPs, Standard Operating Procedures. Now SOPs is the cornerstone of any unit, and there are many SOPs. But then very often a person is penalized for not following the SOP, and even worse, when someone does something wrong, you pardon him because he's followed an SOP. So this SOP has its limitations. If you have a long checklist, that checklist can never stand the test of time. SOPs have to be written to allow for flexibility within them. And it should, as I think I read in a book by Simpkins in the old days, it should allow a person to roam freely within a disciplined framework. The SOP is only a framework and it's not a detailed instruction. If it becomes too detailed, it is going to curb initiative. If it allows people to think within a framework, there would be more initiative. And here, I think there is a need to revisit our SOPs. The last I've written here is the never volunteer axiom. Where did we learn it? We learned it at NDA. Never volunteer. And it stays in your head. Never volunteer. But then if you want to do something that you like to do, the day you get a chance, you must volunteer, you must do it. You may end up doing one or two jobs more than you should, but all of them are of your choice. You'll do them well and the quality will be well. Now, such mindsets which are there in people are actually holding up initiative. And I've just given 4 to give us an example, and we need to build on them and encourage people to have initiative. So initiative is a trait that defines both a leader and a winning team. If you have a team of 5 basketballers, unless each one of them takes charge independently to do what he can when he can, you're not going to win. You can't have the team leader telling them everything. This is a very simple example that somebody who came home yesterday gave me, and I thought it was very relevant. You need to develop initiative in any team. This, looking for time? And now I come to the last point, grit in execution. Grit is a combination of the dynamic qualities of stamina, determination, and courage. It endures with morale and motivation. It is enhanced when bound by loyalty and tradition. It is essential to complete the last mile. A leader must be aware of these dynamics. I just made a slide on this because this is well known to everyone in the army. But then, since the crowd is heterogeneous, maybe we can take on a few questions later if anybody wanted to ask something on this. But everything that we do to build up morale, to motivate, unit traditions are an important facet of making sure things are executed with, I've just used one word, grit, to sum up all these together. So before I conclude, I had said I'll tell you 2 stories. I'll get on to the second story. And this is in Sikkim. You see the picture showing northwest and east Sikkim. There is Gangtok. And this was in 2011 when I was the DG Border Roads, at that time in Delhi. And then we came to know that at 6:10 in the evening, on 18 September 2011, we had an earthquake 6.8 on the Richter scale, which was a very heavy earthquake. And then reports started coming in of all the damage it had done. Roads had cracked, and the road from Sevak to Gangtok was totally closed. There were 14 landslides along this road, and Gangtok was cut off. And for a state capital to be cut off, there was panic all round. And the NDRF team started moving from Delhi, forces started moving from Siliguri, but all of them came up to Sevak Road, what you call the Coronation Bridge, and they were waiting there, asking when will the road open up. The media was already sending stories around. It is going to take minimum 6 weeks, minimum 12 weeks. Some said 4 weeks. And I was being asked for an estimate, and I had no idea what had happened. When I rang up the chief engineer, he had gone to Calcutta for a conference and he was on the train. So he knew as much as I knew. When I checked on the task force commanders, I found they were on the wrong sides of the slide, and there was really no feedback from them. So we checked with the headquarters, and around 10 o'clock I came to know that the stones were still falling. So the instructions were very clear. If the stones are falling, no work. In any case, you can't clear landslides at night. And then early in the morning, I was getting calls from everyone. The Home Secretary rang me up saying, when is this road getting cleared? So I gave him a guesstimate. I said 36 to 48 hours at least. I had got no clear indications from the site. That afternoon, there was a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary, where the Home Secretary was also there, and they were discussing what needs to be done, what should not be done, and other things. I find a slip being passed on to me saying that the road was opened at 12:30. Now, what had happened was that the stones stopped falling, say around 4 o'clock, and the people with machines around there generally decided that by border road standards we can start working. And they started working. And these machines fortunately were deployed all along the road, because we had learned from the previous year's experience of very heavy rains and slides that the roads were being blocked for too long. And then each team was working on its own. And by 12:30, just 18 hours after the earthquake, we got a message that the road is clear. Now, this, if you ask me, was one of the most dynamic actions I'd seen in my entire career, where everyone on the ground seemed to know what to do, when to do it, he was motivated to do it, and they did it. Credit goes to the chief engineer, credit goes to the task force commanders, that they have thought through all this and placed machinery at the right places and given very clear directions and enough leeway for people to start work on their own and do it on their own. And that is another example of initiative. If you talk of grit here, I think each of the dozer operators showed tremendous grit. If you talk of initiative, it was all there. And if you talk of effective communication, why I give this example is, effective communication is not telling a person and getting it done. Effective communication is thinking a thing through and putting in place everything that you need to, so that when it is to be done, it is properly done. So in conclusion, I'll go back to the VUCA world that was scaring us and say it is just another challenging situation. Whatever be the challenging situation, what we need are leaders to address these three things: effective communication, promoting initiative, and make sure there is grit in execution. That star in promoting initiative is there on this slide too, because I think that is one thing which we haven't really given much thought to. Like I said, when you say what is the word you'll use in Hindi for initiative, it doesn't come very quickly. But we have to find ways to promote it at all levels. So I've come to the end of what I have to say. And if there is time, we can take on some more questions. Yeah, so if there are any questions, we can take them on. About?
Military leadership.
Yeah.
So that kicks off the thought in our mind that does principles of leadership conflict with each other, change the discipline of the job? For example, how would it relate to corporate work, your work there? But the one question in our mind is, do leadership principles change in political leadership? So how would you compare these three formats of leadership? They would obviously have commonalities, but what one needs to find out, are there contradictions? Thank you.
I mean, this question is quite simple. The examples I've given are of the military world. Does it relate to the corporate sector? Does it relate to politics? The answer is, in my opinion, it's the same throughout. As far as the corporate sector is concerned, I've spent 8-10 years, and my way of instructing them, very frankly, followed from the verbal orders taught to me there. In the sense, you modified it, but you instructed them. But giving clear instructions is required in the corporate sector, it is required in politics. Some give it, some don't give it, and the results show. Motivation is required everywhere. When I talk of promoting initiative, it is required even more in the corporate sector. I could have connected it with that also, but I'm glad you asked me this question. I ran a capsule for a unicorn where they had grown so fast that the CEO or the CMD, whatever, the all in all, he said, my guys have grown so fast, they have no idea of leadership. And a lot of what I've said was first formulated by me when I was talking to them. I was talking to them about delegation. I was talking to them about promoting initiative in their teams. I was talking about giving minimum instructions, giving clear instructions, and taking a feedback and making sure people report to you that the job is done. Make sure you check back. All these things are very basic in getting jobs done. Only the list, if you say there's a list here, I've said SOPs and things like that that are stopping us. In the corporate sector, it is another set of rules. A very simple rule is, I think now that you've told me, it just struck me, cost and value. Now, what is the difference between cost and value? Cost is what you pay for something. Value is what you get out of it. But today, everything you buy is at minimum cost. When you know if you bought that, it would give you better value. But does the government allow you that? It doesn't. It's difference initiative. Even in corporate sectors, you find this is a problem. And I found everybody in the corporate sector saying, we need to pay more, we need to pay for quality, we need to pay for this, we need to pay for this, these three quotations should go, this should go, that should go. But then it all flows from the general financial regulations. So I looked at the general financial regulations. What does it say about cost and value? And to my surprise, I found the value coming there 75 times in the GFR. And each time it was used as a synonym to cost. You know, it's not good to use the same word again and again, so sometimes cost, sometimes value. But nobody talked of value as something different from cost. So what is actually happening? Everyone is only worried about keeping the cost low, keeping the cost low, keeping the cost low. The initiative to decide this is better than this, the leeway to decide is just not there. Now, all these can be put across in various methods, but you'll find these three things are very fundamental and they apply everywhere. I've given you examples in the corporate sector, I've talked of cost, I've talked of value. There may be more things to train on, there may be more things to get familiar with, but if these three basics are missed out, you're going to have trouble anywhere and everywhere. That is my view. Yeah.
I'm Brigadier Ravi from KS. My question pertains to the world is at war. Two big wars going on, Israel, Hamas war, and Ukraine, Russia war. I would talk about this war from the point of view of leadership. Leadership displayed by Russia, Putin, or Zelensky of.
You'll have to speak a little slowly. I can't make out, I'll come up.
Okay, I'll say it again. Yeah. I'm talking about leadership as it been displayed in the Ukraine war or the Israel-Hamas war. The leadership of Zelensky of Ukraine, leadership brought by Putin, the leadership of Netanyahu in the Israel war, and the various groups that are there, leadership provided by them. What do you learn out of this from the point of view of Indian context? Because the technology is a lot of change there. So what can we learn from them? What is right, what is wrong? Some applications.
I showed you this first slide of VUCA world, where the world is in turmoil. Where did it start? It was first in some of the books written when they came out of Afghanistan. And the term VUCA was to say that everything is so difficult. And that is why we lost. It was more a defensive word, if you ask me, to say things are difficult. But it is not. The situation is not the problem. The challenge is there, whether it's a simple situation or a big situation. Now we talk of leadership. We talk of what we learned from so many leaders. Now, when I'm talking of making leadership simple, I'm talking of things that apply to you and me and apply to Putin and apply to others. If I'm going to mix up my concepts of leadership by bringing in every big leader, does it simplify my approach to leadership or does it complicate it even more? We must be very clear as to what has helped us at every stage and brought us to where we are, and then build on it. And how others have led is something that will be analyzed by people much later. How Dhoni won his battles is being analyzed today. And if you go through it, there are a lot of lessons on leadership that you can learn from Dhoni, of how he anticipated things, how he briefed people, what were his communication skills. Anybody who wants to say that he didn't give any importance to communication? Anybody who wants to say Dhoni didn't give any importance to grit? I think he did, his whole team did, and he motivated them to have it. Many say that his team, he became the captain because nobody else wanted to be a captain. There was Tendulkar there was a Rahul Dravid there, but they made Dhoni the captain so that he becomes the scapegoat. But then he went around, he motivated everyone, and he became a champion. So his leadership involved communicating with them, it involved motivating them, it involved all these qualities. None of that was really not there. Now, if you ask Dhoni, how was he influenced by Patel or by some other leader? It's not relevant. He applied the basics where he was. So, if you want to keep all these leadership ideas less complex, less complicated, you should be reading about it, but you should be experiencing it. Read something, try it, experience it. If it works, it's a good idea. If it doesn't work, it's not a good idea. Without experience, if you keep reading about everyone and everything and start thinking things are getting more and more complicated, you'll find things are only getting more complicated. So, to cut it short, how good they were as leaders we'll come to know 20 years from now, when we know all the facts. Neither am I competent to comment on them, nor have I been following them, nor will I try to make an opinion so early. But then, when you read later about these people, you'll come to know that what they did was essentially quite simple and easy to follow, and something that you and I can follow. So I have gone around the answer, but I'm convinced that we should be crowded by too many such thoughts when we are trying to do something in our surroundings. Yeah.
So I'm Vikram from Advanced Photos Lab. So my question is, over so many years since you have left the army, what are the major drawbacks, or what are the things which you think we are under-experimenting as leadership traits, and which are now maybe becoming instinct from the military leadership as such? And connected to that, the next question is, what do you think are the foreseeable challenges for us as the future commanders while dealing with the Gen Zs and millennials?
See, perceptions change with time. When I was in IMA as an instructor, we had people from NDA coming and telling us how NDA was, how great it was, how good it was. And at the end of it, they'll say, but what? So nowadays, they're being banned. It's not what it used to be in our first term. He's just spent 6 terms in NDA in our first term. And then I would tell him, I mean, he would say, now it is like, with processing all those words, you can't use them here. So I would tell them, if those guys are for crosswords, then you guys, when we came, the same thing happened. And it happened with the next course and the next course. So you guys must be 100 X's put together, because if every year things were getting that bad, it would only get worse. But the fact is that the course you guys are doing today, if my batchmates had done it, all of them would have failed. You look at the records today, all the records we created have been broken. Today you guys are starting at a much higher pace and training much harder. And I, as an instructor, am definitely much more strict than instructors in our times. So do you still want to say that you guys are so many X's, or you guys are better than us? I think you're better than us. So this perception comes from generally the people who are sitting ahead of you. The older people say in our times. But then you're disconnected. I mean, you like to think these are set pieces. These are formats in your mind. Things are definitely improving. People are definitely becoming better and better. The army is definitely better trained. But if there is one thing which I feel is required, it is just one. We need to focus more on initiative at all levels. It's a fact that in the old days, we worked in large bodies. Today, we are becoming smaller bodies. Decisions are a little faster. You can't be spoon feeding at every level. And that is one thing that you must focus on. And that is why my talk has been focused on that. What you need to do after a few years, don't ask me. It will be covered by all these wrong perceptions. And one is very consciously shutting off from all that and not commenting on it, because I know I'm not equipped to comment on it. Okay. Find your way. Look at things. Experience it. Look at ideas. Try them out. Experience it. If it works, it's a good idea. If it doesn't, it's not. an idea being bookish is of no use. It should be experienced, it should not be a belief, it should be a practice. And then adopt it. Just reading books and deciding this is what you have to do is not required. Keep trying it, keep experimenting and explore. And this experimenting and exploring comes with the spirit of adventure. Okay. So if you feel that is not there deep in you, go on a few adventures and keep experimenting and you will find answers to everything yourself.
Last question.
Last question.
Myself, Credit Vedant Shankar from DY University. Actually, as a youth, I have a little bit more critical question. Many of the youths try to be a leader now. Means they want to be a leader, but there is a fine borderline between leadership and dictatorship. So many of them choose the path by mistake, not by purpose or anything like that, but choose the path of dictatorship. So how do you suggest to overcome these situations when we want to stick on to the path of leadership and not part of the dictatorship?
It's a good question, and I'm very glad that someone from the student audience has also asked. I don't mind sharing this presentation in a different way with all of you because, very frankly, it was not pitched at your level. But almost everything I said was to take you away from being a dictator to delegating, to listening, to giving instructions, to taking feedback, to motivation, and all that. Okay. So as long as you have the empathy for the people with you, as long as you have trust for those around you, you will share ideas with them and you will let them work freely. If you don't trust them, then you become a dictator. Okay. Now, before you become a leader, you have to learn to be a good team member. Every team member must listen to a leader. Every team member must act independently without stepping on the toes of those around them. That is important. So learning to be a good team member is the first thing that you learn in college. Learning to be a leader using the talent of everyone else is the best way to lead. And I'm sure that's what all of you do. Where you use everyone's strength, you listen to them, and you get them to work. And if you work like this, there's no need to be a dictator. And as we all know, being a dictator is not what either you want or what others want. It is something which history tells you later that you were a dictator, which means you didn't trust others, you didn't let others work, you had a team with low morale, and all those dictators, history tells you, they fell down the line. So that is the best motivation to not be a dictator and follow this kind of a model that I've told you, where you are promoting initiative in a team. If you're promoting initiative in a team, you're not in it.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I request you all to give a round of applause to our speaker, Shankar. Today is Navy Day, and I extend warm greetings to all naval officers and men who are here. Thank you all. Leadership is a complex subject. Nobody has been able to answer the question, are the leaders born or they can be trained? So I must thank Shankar for presenting this complex subject in a very simple manner. He highlighted that leaders must focus on three things. First is effective communication, and he gave an example of verbal orders which are given by junior leaders and how they can be used throughout your life in various situations. And he gave an example of how he briefs his driver, a very small thing, but how it can be done effectively. The other focus was promoting initiative, and he gave an example of how the crevice crossing bridges were constructed for various sizes of crevices. And then he mentioned that people do not know what is the Hindi equivalent of initiative. But I will give the answer. It's called Pahal. हमने पहल की और हम सियाचिन ग्लेशियर पे बैठ गए. So that is initiative. Not a word not very popular, not very well known. And the third thing that he mentioned was grit in execution. And he gave the example of how the snow scooters were able to cross over the bridge or across the crevice. He gave various examples of how, when he served in Siachen Glacier in 1990, how things were operationalized over there. And the Sikkim Earthquake, which took place in 2017, 6.8 on the Richter scale, how the roads were opened in a very record time of 18 hours at 12:30 in the morning, when nobody expected them to be open for until a week or a few weeks later. And lastly, he summed up by saying that in the VUCA world today, these three essentials can actually give a workable approach to solve these issues. And then he also mentioned about how he trained the unicorn leaders who knew nothing about leadership. I must thank the Commandant BG and the commanding officer of Depot Battalion for giving us an excellent infrastructure and logistic support to organize this event. I also thank Mrs. Grant for giving us the opportunity for hosting this lecture year after year. Thank you, ma'am. And I must thank the audience for exceeding our expectations and filling this hall completely and being very, very interactive. I must make a mention of D.Y. Patil University, who have sent their students of their college here. Thank you very much. And of course, my thanks go to General Gadkari, who stirred everybody out of their slumber and made people ask questions. And now, of course, the best part of the program, we have high tea laid out for you, which is behind this building. Please join us. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.